Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes as others are still joining us, and then we'll make a start. Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. We hope everyone is keeping safe and healthy. And this webinar today is part of Streetbees COVID-19 series with a focus today on how home life and in-home habits have changed for consumers over the course of the pandemic, what habits will persist once restrictions have lifted, and what could the new normal mean for life at home, and how should brands and companies like yourselves adapt to the new world. So just before we get into it and we introduce ourselves, a little bit of housekeeping. You should be able to see the questions function. Please feel free to type your question and ask a question at any time, and both Bertie and I will be stopping at various different points to hopefully answer those questions. If we can't get through them all, we're going to make sure we get back to you on email if we don't get a chance to answer. If there's a problem with the tech, please bear with us. I'm having some internet issues this week, which is delightful. And we're also recording this session, so let us know if you'd like the recording afterwards to share with your team or colleagues. We'll also be navigating, you'll see on my screen, through our COVID-19 dashboard, and some of the information and data gets a little small, so I recommend you use full screen or zoom in for the best quality. Okay, so with that, we'll start. So my name is Brian Hackett. I'm Global Strategy Director at Streetbees. I'm responsible for a number of different counts, a number of different categories that we're going to go through today. And joining me this afternoon is my colleague Bertie, who I'll let introduce himself now.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Brian. My name is Bertie Lewis. I am a client consultant at Streetbees, so working on some of our largest global accounts across multiple different categories as well.
Very good. So as briefly mentioned, we're going to be covering what's going on in people's homes and how consumers have adapted their lives to cope with COVID-19. We're going to explore a number of different categories and explore what types of changes might stick. And we're going to be using insights and data from a number of different categories, as I mentioned. So all these available on our COVID-19 hit dashboard. And the ones we'll be looking at today are kind of home cooking, alcohol, media entertainment, and home improvement and working from home. So hopefully there's some really interesting insights you can leverage. So on my screen right now is something we use just to have a really quick check-in on what the international mood is. And this is across the core 10 markets where we're gathering data for our clients. And overall, the mood, as you can see on the left here, is actually quite good and positive at the moment overall. But this is kind of contrasted with people feeling anxious and stressed. And if we hover over individual countries, for instance, if I hover over America, we can see that the predominant emotional feeling in the US is of anxiety and stress. And for countries like Spain, 17% of people are feeling anxious or stressed. And Italy, people are feeling anxious and stressed. Whereas other countries, such as China, who are coming out of the pandemic and are further along the path, are feeling a little more good and positive at 33%. And France and Germany as well are two of the markets feeling quite good and positive. What we do see, though, is that they're depending on what's going on in the market at any given point of time, that this fluctuates quite strongly. So that is why we have something called the fear index, which we track over time. So this is our fear index here. And this is since we started tracking in China in January, and then other markets picked up from the 8th of March. So for example, here we're looking at the data for all markets and also the data for China, Germany, and the UK. And what this is the result of a question that we ask in a scale and calculate the answers based on the percentage of people who are afraid versus those who are not afraid, and that's how the index worked. And you can see quite clearly that the UK, whilst decreasing over the last few weeks, it was quite significantly ahead of other markets, and over the last few weeks has begun to reduce, still slightly ahead of other markets such as Germany and China, where the fear index has really begun to come down. So this gives us a really good idea of kind of what's going on in the various different markets, and it kind of tells the story of what's happening in those markets. So we know, for instance, last week that in Germany shops began to reopen, the Bundesliga restarted, behind closed doors, of course, and all this has resulted in a somewhat return to normality and people feeling a little bit better. And so the fear index has begun to drop, but still remains fairly high as it does across the globe. So this is something that we look at, because the fear index is actually something that is a strong barometer of human behavior. And a high level of fear means consumers continue to spend the majority of their time at home and also have adapted behaviors of consumption and purchasing that they didn't have before the pandemic. So the fear level is something that really gives us an indicator of how people are returning to some sort of normality, and kind of the lower we see, the more normal a market is behaving. But whilst it remains high across the globe and across specific markets, we still see a lot of kind of adaptive behaviors. The other contextual thing we're going to look at before kind of diving into the data is in our economic impact tab. And this is telling us how countries are spending differently and how that is changing over time. So this is looking at all data globally, and we see the top behavior in terms of spend is that people are spending less than they normally are. They're also spending more on food, groceries, and other essentials, and quite a lot of people are also spending less on leisure and entertainment. And this chart on the right hand side is a time series that charts how this behavior is changing or maintaining over time. So that we can see that people overall are maintaining their behavior around spending less than usual. But in more recent weeks, as the pandemic has continued, people are continuing to spend less on leisure and entertainment, which is something interesting that we'll come on to a little bit later when we look at that. So these two things these two tabs provide us with quite a lot of rich context for how people are behaving and what are the indicators of those behaviors. And I'm actually going to pass over to Bertie now, who's going to speak a little bit about our activity engagement index.
Absolutely, thanks, Brian. So yes, as you alluded to, some of our behaviours and our activities have of course changed over the last few months and weeks. And what we're looking at here is now our activity engagement index. So that is the percentage of people doing more versus the percentage of people doing less. And Brian, I appreciate this one's a little bit small. So if we were to zoom in on that activity index, the top thing we're seeing top activity we're seeing come out across the world is actually cooking at home and scratch cooking. Now, that is because people have more time to be cooking, but also because people are spending more time at home. Those lunchtime occasions are coming out within that time as well. And if you look at some things like online and social media as well, we're seeing that actually, of course, that has gone up over time too. What we're seeing, obviously, at the other end of the spectrum in terms of what people are doing far less, of course, is eating out and going to public and live events. But in light of lockdown measures being gradually reduced across the world, what we're seeing is a change over time in these measures. So if you scroll to the right, Brian, you can see that actually that increase in cooking at home has kind of leveled out. There's no longer that increase in acceleration of spending time at home, and actually things like spending time outdoors, where in the UK you're able to now meet with up to 6 people outside. I myself was in the park this weekend with some friends from a socially different perspective, and with people spending more time outdoors, we can actually gradually anticipate the return of things like eating out. So, for example, you're able to buy a pizza whilst you're at the park, whilst you're maintaining social distancing. So actually, that does lead to eating out, but these other behaviours are indeed coming first. And what I alluded to there was about talking about cooking at home. And of course, we've seen cooking at home become one of the major trends we've seen across COVID. But one of the benefits of this tracker is that we're able to see how cooking at home is trended over time and trended across markets. So, for instance, if we're looking at China here, there was a huge increase in cooking at home. But given that that market is more advanced in its developments and combating of the virus, we've seen actually that red line, cooking at home for China, actually trend down over time to the point where now we're almost seeing a flat level of home cooking. Other markets, similarly, we're seeing it, for instance, in Germany as well, where there's limited number of new cases, we're seeing that scratch cooking go down. So actually, what you could take from this is that as lockdown measures are lifted and we are coming out of lockdown, those scratch cooking moments are actually going to go back down, and they are leveling out to a new normal level. Not quite at the increases that we've seen, but certainly slightly more than we've seen in the past. So in terms of eating habits as well, so we've spoken about those home cooking moments, and what is important to realize is that actually home cooking moments, yes, that's come out on top, but it's ultimately to look at the drivers behind that and who is actually looking, what are the motivations behind that home cooking. So what we've actually seen is that, yes, home cooking is one of the top reasons that the top ways in which people have changed their eating habits under coronavirus, but actually we're seeing that one of the main motivations is to eat more healthily. And diving into that a little bit further, we know that actually people are looking to boost their immunity through eating healthily. And there is a clear disparity between the younger generation who are looking to eat more healthily and boost their immunity versus the older generation who are actually looking to drive home cooking and scratch cooking in their eating habits going forward. So in terms of adapting your thoughts as a food manufacturer, for example, you want to be appealing to the healthy intentions of your younger demographic and appealing to the scratch cooking, home cooking moments and motivations of your older demographics. And with that, I'm going to hand back over to Brian, who is going to talk about consumption of food. But I've spoken about consumption of food, and Brian's now going to talk more about consumption of drinks.
Yeah, thanks, Bertie. We're going to look specifically at alcohol, which has probably been the most interesting category for us to observe for a number of reasons. And the first is that there's really interesting dynamics. And overall, we see that the alcohol purchase index is down quite significantly, in that people are buying a lot less alcohol. However, in recent weeks, it's begun to pick back up. And what's this driven by is about 30% of people have changed their habits. So 27% of people have said they've changed their alcohol drinking habits. But what's interesting is the polarization of these two things. 43% of people are saying they're drinking less than they did before coronavirus, but 41% of people saying they're actually drinking more. So people are coping with coronavirus in lots of different ways, and alcohol is a category that's been most impacted in this regard. When we look at the why people's drinking habits have changed, and those increased drinking moments are really been driven by the amount of free time that people have and boredom. And for those who are drinking a little bit less, it's to be healthier in their everyday lives. There's also the fact that younger people are unable to go out, and a lot of their alcohol socialing happened in the on-trade, and so they're unable to meet their friends and have drinks like they used to, whereas older people, because they're unable to go out, are tending to drink more at home. So really, really interesting dynamics there. And we know that drinking is a very, very social activity for people. So when they're drinking more frequently at home, so 30% of people are saying they're more drinking at home, they're attempting to make the occasion a lot more social. So one of the main things, and I'm sure we can all identify with it, is that people are using video calling apps and meetings to connect with their friends and family whilst having a drink. They're also chatting and messaging, and playing games. And something that's really interesting here is that people are also looking to mix their own drinks and cocktails. 10% of people there you can see, but they're also having these shared experiences together. So watching TV and films. And what we find really interesting about that is that the need for socializing and connecting with friends is still there. However, the demand space and occasions as we knew them previously have shifted fundamentally. And really what we want to look at is to understand going forward how many more of these moments and occasions are going to be happening at home. How are people going to react to markets and pubs and the on-trade opening back up? And will we still have these new occasions that we need to activate against and compare against? So these, what I've flipped to here is the contextual information that we're able to gather at Streetbees. So since we started gathering data of in the moment alcoholic occasions or alcohol occasions, 97% of these occasions have been happening in the home. 50% of them have been happening alone, and 35% have been with a spouse and partner. So really different dynamics to what we're used to in this category. And these are things that we expect to see maintained going forward. We do think that other areas and other places will open up and people will socialize, but some of the habits here and people spending more time at home is liable to continue, especially if we remember some of the economic impact that people are going to be experiencing. So they're going to be looking for cheaper ways of socializing and connecting with their friends, and also looking at ways to relax and de-stress at home. So this has been quite fascinating for us. The other thing that's been interesting throughout the pandemic that's worth noting is the time of day, which took us a little bit by surprise. So I'm just going to turn on some of the stats here so you can see. So we can see that the majority of alcohol occasions are still happening from the afternoon on, but there's a significant minority of these occasions, actually up to 17%, that are taking place during the morning. So people don't have a lot to do, they're being furloughed, they're working from home, and they're turning to generally beer in these moments to have a relaxing moment on their own. So quite interesting that quite a few of these alcohol occasions are now happening in the morning. So there's lots of potential implications here for companies and brands as these habits and behaviors continue. You know, there's going to be a lot more at home and micro socializing throughout the summer as countries open back up, but people still aren't comfortable mixing with strangers. So things, lots of garden parties, barbecues, house parties, kind of these micro get-togethers of 10 people or less. So that's going to, we think, is something that's really going to go big in the next few weeks and the coming months. So learning how to activate. The other thing that we think is interesting is the channels that people purchase in. So online and formats are going to be really important, and consumers are turning more to direct to consumer models as well. So anecdotally, in the qualitative data we've been gathering, alcohol is a category that consumers are trying to buy directly. We're going to have a quick look now, moving on from there, at media and entertainment. So media and entertainment is something that has been fundamentally impacted by COVID-19, and people really are blessed. They've never had so many choices when it comes to at-home entertainment. And we can see here in our purchase index that people are spending more time and more money streaming movies, purchasing on-demand TV subscriptions, and also gaming. So people are gaming a lot more. We can see the categories that are losing out quite heavily are magazines, as people are no longer commuting, are consuming a lot more online. Physical magazines have actually been the biggest losers. And we also see interesting that on-demand music subscriptions have come down. So maybe people who have been commuting and needed the premium functions have been turning off their on-demand music subscriptions to save some money and refocusing that spend on movie streaming. So that's been quite interesting for us to look at over time. The other thing that we've found quite interesting is what people are doing. So the majority of people in the moment are watching TV and films or streaming services. And there's some variation throughout countries. So we've just picked Spain and the UK here, and we see that in Spain, people are more likely to be streaming services, and in the UK, people are slightly more likely to be watching TV and films. We also see some differences in devices across markets, where globally smartphones are kind of the chosen device of choice for consuming media. In Spain, it's the TV, and in the UK, TV also, but the UK also over indexes on tablets and games consoles, which is quite an interesting nuance. One of the other things we found quite interesting is, and is quite a bit of worry actually, for those who produce TV and movies, is that 67% of people globally are watching something that they haven't watched before. So they're looking and are hungry for new content. And we can see across markets the type of content they're looking for. So people in the UK, much more likely to seek solace in comedy, whereas in Spain, they're looking more for action and adventure. So that's something that's quite interesting, and something that we're monitoring and keeping an eye on, because those nuances across markets also tell us something about the mood and cultural aspects of those markets. And we also see, when we ask people, are they doing anything differently today in terms of entertainment, we see globally 40% of people are changing their regime and entertainment habits. And for the most part, they're watching and consuming an awful lot more content. But we're also seeing from people and hearing from people qualitatively, when we ask them what could be improved or changed, is that they're looking for free or cheaper streaming sites. It's now reached the point where, you know, people are paying their TV license and they're subscribing maybe to a Netflix, a Hulu, an Amazon Prime, and they also have a Spotify subscription. And that's before we even talk about sports subscriptions. So people are finding actually quite a lot of economic stress when it comes to media and entertainment. And this is something that companies will need to look at, as people cannot keep expanding their repertoire. So we expect that to come down quite a lot. We also think there's some interesting opportunities for activation here, and potentially for model changes, especially around cinematic releases, how people are also, as we saw in the alcohol category, how people are having shared viewing experiences with friends online, or together. So again, there's new nascent occasions appearing here as people are spending more time at home, and we expect these occasions to continue to grow as people grow more used to them. So now Bertie's going to take a closer look at the home and how people's relationships have been shifting over the course of COVID-19 with the home and what they've been doing. But we might just pause there and see if we've any questions. I can see we have one. So if alcohol is decreasing, how are beverages impacted? And are people developing new habits around teas and herbal infusions? That's a great question. I won't jump into the dashboard. That's one that we've been asked previously. And what we see actually is that teas, herbal infusions, and coffees have actually been taking the place of alcohol for many people in terms of mood shifts and relaxing beverages. So hopefully that helps to answer your question. So people they're not drinking less beverages, but they're definitely replacing those beverages, particularly those who are looking for more healthy options with infusions, teas, and coffees. I'm now going to pass over to Bertie and have a little look at the home and home improvement.
Of course. So this part of the dashboard is going to be looking at how we're spending our time at home. And of course, there's been huge changes there, where our homes are now becoming our offices, our gyms, and also our entertainment spaces, our pubs, our bars, our cafes. So huge changes there. And one of the big changes I wanted to drill into, and one of the big themes I wanted to pull apart, is that now we've been under lockdown for an extended period of time, I wanted to look at the different rooms in people's houses and why people find those rooms their favorite and why they're spending more time there, and thinking about the different households that exist in these spaces, and then what that is driving the individuals in those households to do. So if you scroll just to the left, Brian, we're seeing actually across the world that the bedroom is the favorite place of many people across the world. But then in terms of how that splits out across the different households, for example, I've pulled out here people who are living alone, people living just with their partner or spouse, and then people who are living with their parents, kind of cross-generational households. And we can see that, okay, people living with their parents tend to prefer their bedrooms, and that will ultimately be because they're looking for more privacy, for example. And you can see that driven in the right hand side there. So people like their bedrooms because they can actually find more privacy there, they can get away from others in some cases. But then you've got the other end of the spectrum there, where people are living with their partner and spouse, and actually they're preferring the living room because it's in fact best for relaxing. So they might have spent the day in isolation from their partner working or being on furlough, and actually they enjoy coming back to that lounge space so that they can actually enjoy some together time. And then finally, there's looking at this, the people who are living alone, and we see that actually they do prefer the bedroom, but that's ultimately to drive some disparity between the different areas in their households. Perhaps these individuals are working in their lounge or the kitchen living area, and at the end of the day they want to be able to cut themselves off from their working day and actually spend time in their bedroom where they can spend time relaxing and getting away from their work day through different experiences and different spaces, of course, in their house. Now, in terms of people working from home, we've seen actually people would 8 out of 10 Brits would in fact prefer to continue working from home, and actually even that's despite being told if they could go into the office if it was safe in the office. So what we've seen in our dashboard is that people are making changes to their households based on the changes to how they're using their houses. So we've spoken before about people working from home, working from their living rooms, and actually what we've seen is that people are looking to bring those spaces to life and rearrange those spaces in perhaps the times that they have to break from their working day. So actually more time being spent adding furniture, rearranging furniture, and ultimately looking for ways in which they can improve their house. But we're also seeing this as a form of kind of procrastination as well. There's more time to think about those home improvements. And one thing we've seen, particularly in the UK, but actually we're seeing more and more across urban centres specifically, is people trying to bring an outside space or a theme of outside space into their houses. So whether that is in UK urban centres specifically, we've seen people adding houseplants, and we've seen people in the Far East, for example, looking to actually just create an area in their house that almost feels like an outdoor space in the absence of having any outside space themselves. So people are getting to the point now where they're really craving going outdoors and being in a green environment. So how can brands and manufacturers deliver this experience to people who are now getting continually craving this outside space?
Thanks, Bertie. So I think we've got a couple of really interesting questions that we'd like to get to before we finish, because I think it'll be interesting for everyone. And the first one is, how do we think the increase in time spent at home due to increased home working is likely to affect on-the-go occasions? So I think it's a great question. I think it's one that a lot of our food and beverage clients have, and what we say to them is because there's going to be a fundamental impact in on-the-go occasions with less people commuting and less people traveling. We don't really have an indication of that percentage yet. Those on-the-go moments are going to be an awful lot less. However, what we are seeing at home and what we are seeing in the delivery space is a large increase in D2C. And we're also seeing a huge growth in the UK, still quite small, but from a low base, around something called rapid delivery, which the likes of Deliveroo and Uber Eats are offering, where people are replacing their on-the-go moment at home with something a bit more of a treat from a local shop, be that a beverage or a snack that's delivered. And with the advent of more premium Deliveroo and Uber Eats membership subscriptions, this will then be delivered for free. So we think there's going to be a huge impact on on-the-go occasions, but we do see a lot of those occasions transferring. We also have a final question from Marina at Unilever. So how do you explain people are cooking less at home? And actually, I think what Bertie was actually saying is that there was a huge spike at the beginning of the pandemic of people cooking at home. This has declined a little bit, but overall, we're still seeing people cook at home more than they were beforehand. We will expect people to go back outside after the lockdown period, but I think people are saying that if they were cooking at home, they've gotten quite used to that, and they do intend to keep that behavior going. So it won't quite be as much as what it was at the start of the pandemic when we had a huge spike, but we definitely see home cooking going forward as increasing very much versus what it was previously. And that ties into the other question about where people are for their work and how they're commuting, etc. we've actually come to the end of our time. That went quite quickly. So thanks a lot for joining us. Today we looked at in-home behaviour, but our most recent product, a return to life monitor, covers a number of different categories, both in-home and out of home, and is tracking how people are returning to life, how they're returning to their commutes, where they're going first, and we're again tracking that week and week. So if there's a specific category you'd like to talk to us about around return to life, please write it in the chat box and leave your email. We'll come back to you. We'll be following up on any questions we did get a chance to answer, and we'll reach out to you individually. But all that's left for me to say is thank you very much for your time. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.